He was 11, face down on the ground, hands scraped bloody against gravel, knees digging into the dirt while the man with the badge whispered, "You're not going to grow up to be anything but this." His little sister watched, crying so hard she hiccuped. And when their mother ran out screaming from the corner store, the officer just laughed and said, "Training him early." 20 years later, that same boy stood silent in court, charged with assaulting an officer he had never even met. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. The courtroom in Montgomery County was colder than the January wind outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the smell of old paper and dust clung to the walls. Langston Myles sat at the defense table, hands folded tightly, every muscle in his jaw clenched. He looked like he belonged in a suit. He didn't look like someone facing 8 years for assault. And maybe that was the problem. "All rise," the bailiff called. Langston stood, not because he respected the process, but because if he didn't, they'd say he had an attitude. They'd say he looked defiant. Judge Eileen Carrington entered. 63. White. Stern. The kind of judge who only smiled when cameras were on. She took her seat behind the bench. "Mr. Myles," she said, voice flat, "you were charged with felony battery of a peace officer, obstruction of an active investigation, and resisting arrest. Do you understand these charges?" Langston's throat felt dry, but his voice came clear. "I understand." She nodded, jotting something on her legal pad. The prosecutor stood. Meredith Lewis. Polished. Precise. The kind who could smile while calling you dangerous. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that on the night of December 18th, the defendant, Mr. Myles, interfered with a police investigation, attacked Officer Derek Faulkner, and caused physical injury. We have dashcam footage, body cam audio, medical records, and a sworn eyewitness." Langston didn't look at the jury. Not yet. He knew what they saw. A tall, sharp-featured black man in a charcoal suit. Calm, but not smiling. Not apologetic. Not small. And that was dangerous. "Thank you, Ms. Lewis," the judge said. "Defense?" Jamal Harper rose slowly. Public defender. Young. Overworked. "Your Honor, Mr. Myles will plead not guilty. We will demonstrate that Officer Faulkner approached the scene with no reasonable suspicion, used force without cause, and that the so-called eyewitness is not only unreliable, but biased." The video tells a very different story. Langston turned his head slightly. Jamal hadn't told him about using that angle. The judge raised her eyebrows. "Bias? That's a serious claim. You'll need to substantiate that." "We intend to." The judge wrote again, then looked up. "Due to the nature of the charge and the involvement of law enforcement, bail is denied. Defendant is remanded." Langston blinked. "No bail?" He turned to Jamal, confused. "We will be requesting a reconsideration," Jamal said quickly. But the judge had already turned to the next page in her file. The bailiff moved toward Langston. "Hands behind your back." Langston didn't flinch. He stood. Slowly. Deliberately. He heard his mother gasp softly in the back row. His sister's hand clutched hers tightly. The cuffs clicked into place. And the memory came rushing back. 11 years old. Face in the dirt. Cold metal on his wrists. That same silence in the air, the kind that comes before your life changes without your permission. As they walked him out, Langston didn't speak. He just looked up at the courtroom seal hanging over the judge's bench. He wondered how many other people it had watched fall. Langston sat in the holding cell beneath the courthouse, his back pressed to the cool cement wall. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. The bench was metal, cold, and unforgiving, just like the process itself. He had been here less than 2 hours, but the silence already felt familiar, like a room he'd once lived in. A steel toilet in the corner. A thick steel door with a narrow window. And no clock. Time was something they got to control now. He stared at his wrists. Red lines had formed where the cuffs had bitten into his skin. He flexed his fingers slowly, blood returning to the edges of his hands. The door clanked open. "Visitor." Langston stood. They walked him down the hallway, past other cells, some full, some empty, until they reached a small interview room. Inside sat Jamal Harper, tie loosened, folders spread across the table. Langston sat across from him. "What just happened?" he asked. Jamal rubbed his face. "You got remanded. No bail. That's not unusual in officer assault cases, especially when the cops got a concussion." "I didn't touch him." Jamal nodded. "I know. But the problem is, they don't care about what you didn't do. They care about what they can prove or make look real." Langston leaned forward. "What's the video show?" "Nothing helpful. No audio. Officer Faulkner's body cam was malfunctioning, and the dash cam is pointed the wrong way. We see them arguing. Then Faulkner stumbles backward. Then sirens. That's it. Langston exhaled through his nose. And the eyewitness? Jamal pulled out a photo. A man named Greg Hostler. 65. Lives across the street from the scene. Retired. Calls the precinct once a week. He says you lunged at Faulkner. Lunged? Langston repeated. Seriously. Jamal didn't answer. He just looked tired. Langston leaned back. So what now? We fight. But they're gonna drag your name through everything. They're going to say you're aggressive, defensive, unstable. They'll pull up every moment in your life that makes you look like you could have snapped. Langston clenched his jaw. He thought about Sasha, about his mom, about the kids at the youth center. What would they think? Would they believe it? They already decided who I am, he said quietly. Jamal looked up. They did. But they're not the ones who get the final word. Langston didn't respond. He just stared at the table, at the manila folder with his name in all caps. Not a person. A file. A case. A threat. He stood slowly. When's the arraignment? Tomorrow. 9 a.m. Langston nodded once. The door opened behind him. As they led him back to the cell, he kept his eyes forward. Kept his steps even. Refused to flinch. They already thought they knew his story. But they didn't know the ending. Not yet. Langston didn't sleep that night. The walls of the holding cell closed in slowly, inch by inch, until it felt like breathing through cloth. The metal bench under him refused to soften, and the fluorescent light above him buzzed just enough to drive a man out of his thoughts and into something worse. He had learned a long time ago how to be still. But this wasn't about stillness. This was about being stuck. Again, he replayed the moment in his mind. Officer Faulkner approaching the car, asking questions with his hand already near his belt. The tone, the posture, the power, and then that sudden stumble, manufactured, performative, and the shouts that followed. Langston had kept his hands visible the entire time. Didn't matter. In the morning, a guard came for him. Let's go. Arraignment. They walked the same hallway. Same scuffed floors. Same thick air. This time, though, the courtroom was more crowded. News of the case had spread. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but the hallway outside buzzed with murmurs, and some officers stood near the back wall with arms crossed like statues. Langston's mother was in the second row. Sasha beside her, jaw clenched. They both looked like they hadn't slept either. The judge entered. Langston stood. So did Jamal Harper. The prosecution launched into new claims. The officer required medical attention. The suspect's tone was agitated and confrontational. The suspect refused to comply with verbal commands. Langston didn't flinch. Then they called the first witness, Greg Hostler. He shuffled up to the stand, wearing a tan jacket and oversized hearing aids. His voice trembled just enough to feel credible. I saw him jump at the officer. It was aggressive. I was afraid for the officer's safety. Jamal didn't object. He let it ride. When it was his turn to cross-examine, Jamal stood slowly. Mr. Hostler, you say you saw the entire incident clearly? Yes. How far were you from the scene? About 50 feet. Across the street. And what time was this? Around 9:45 p.m. Jamal nodded, flipping through a folder. Do you wear glasses, Mr. Hostler? I do. Were you wearing them that night? There was a pause. No, I was getting them replaced. Jamal tilted his head. So you were standing across the street, 50 feet away, in the dark, without your glasses, and you still feel confident that you saw Mr. Myles make an aggressive movement? Hostler hesitated. I saw enough. No further questions. Jamal sat down. The judge scribbled something. But Langston could feel it. The tension in the air had shifted. Not enough to break. Just enough to stretch. The judge called a recess. As Langston was led back out, he passed Officer Faulkner for the first time since the arrest. The man didn't look at him. Just whispered something to the officer beside him, who chuckled. Langston didn't turn around. But he burned every second of it into memory. The game had started. And they were playing dirty. The next morning, the courtroom was different. The chairs weren't filled with strangers anymore. They were filled with watchers. Uniforms lined the back wall. Lawyers shifted in their seats with tighter shoulders. And near the front, two reporters scribbled quietly even though no cameras were allowed. Langston stood as Judge Carrington entered. She didn't look at him. Not once. The bailiff called the court to order. The prosecutor rose, her tone sharper now. Your Honor, the state will now call Officer Derek Faulkner to the stand. Langston didn't move. He watched as the man entered from a side door, uniform crisp, left wrist wrapped in a thick beige brace. He sat, adjusted the microphone, and folded his hands neatly on the table. "Officer Faulkner," the prosecutor began, "can you describe the events of December 18th? "Yes, ma'am," he said. "I was conducting a traffic stop when I observed the defendant exiting his vehicle in an aggressive manner. I ordered him to stay inside. He ignored that command, approached me quickly, and lunged. I attempted to subdue him, and in the process, injured my wrist and fell." The prosecutor nodded. "And was he verbally aggressive?" "Yes. Loud, confrontational, hostile." "And did he strike you?" "I can't confirm if it was a punch, but he made physical contact. That's when I called for backup." "Thank you, officer." No further questions. Langston's hands curled into fists under the table. Jamal stood slowly. "Officer Faulkner, how long have you been with the department?" 13 years. "In those 13 years, how many use of force complaints have been filed against you?" The courtroom stilled. The prosecutor rose. "Objection. Irrelevant." Jamal didn't flinch. "Your Honor, I'm establishing a pattern of behavior that may explain the officer's conduct during the incident." Judge Carrington hesitated, then nodded. "I'll allow it. Proceed." Faulkner shifted in his chair. 5 complaints, he said. "And how many were sustained?" "None." "Were any of those related to interactions with unarmed individuals?" "Yes." "And you were cleared every time?" "Yes." "Cleared by internal review?" "Yes." Jamal paused. "Isn't it true that your body cam has been malfunctioning during more than one of those incidents?" Faulkner blinked. I don't recall the details. Would it surprise you to know that in 3 of those 5 cases, body cam footage was incomplete or missing?" The prosecutor objected again. "He's testifying to internal records not presented to the court." Jamal turned. "I can submit the public summaries." "Do it," said the judge. Faulkner didn't look up. Jamal continued. "Officer, is it standard procedure to approach a civilian with your hand on your weapon?" "Depends on the situation." "What was threatening about Mr. Myles that night?" "He exited the car aggressively." "Did he raise his voice?" "No." "Did he raise his hands?" "No." "But you felt threatened?" "I assessed the situation as dangerous." Jamal stepped back. No further questions. Langston looked across the room. His mother had her eyes closed. Sasha was staring holes through Faulkner's skull. Outside the windows, a gray sky had begun to darken. Inside, the cracks were finally beginning to show. The rain started during lunch break. Langston sat in a corner of the holding area, watching droplets snake down the narrow window slit like they were in no hurry to hit the ground. A low hum of conversation echoed in the distance, but no one spoke to him. That was fine. He needed the silence. He was replaying Faulkner's testimony. The way the officer had said loud and confrontational like it meant dangerous. The way he'd used lunged instead of stepped. The way everyone had nodded as if language like that wasn't loaded with assumptions. By now, Jamal had started to circle the weakness. But it wasn't enough. The prosecution was framing the case as a dangerous man who escalated. Langston knew what came next. They would come for his background, his reputation, his past. He thought of the youth center, the file he kept in his drawer. Not a resume, a log. Every court decision he'd ever helped a teen understand. Every affidavit he'd quietly prepared for kids whose parents couldn't afford a lawyer. Every time he had to explain to a boy barely old enough to shave why standing silent didn't mean you'd be spared. He had never used it, never spoken about it. Until now. The door opened. A deputy nodded. "Back in 5. Langston stood. The courtroom felt colder than it had that morning. He entered just as the prosecutor pulled up a grainy screenshot from a police database. "Your Honor," she said, "we believe the court should consider prior associations that may suggest Mr. Myles holds hostility toward law enforcement." "Objection," Jamal snapped, standing. "There is no prior record." "We're not talking about criminal history," the prosecutor replied smoothly. "We're talking about community behavior, anti-police sentiment, publicly posted criticisms of law enforcement procedures." Jamal turned to the judge. "We're opening a door we can't close." Judge Carrington folded her hands. "I'll allow limited inquiry. But be very careful, Ms. Lewis." The prosecutor clicked again. Another screen loaded. A photo. Langston speaking at a town hall. Standing beside a young man in a hoodie. This is Mr. Myles in 2021, participating in a panel that labeled policing in low-income neighborhoods as predatory. She turned to the jury. Is this the attitude of someone who sees officers as protectors? Or someone looking for confrontation? Langston stood. Not Jamal. Langston. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Carrington looked surprised. You may. Langston walked to the center of the courtroom. His voice was low but steady. I run a youth legal outreach program. It's not a business. It doesn't even have a name. We help kids understand their rights because most of them don't get second chances. He paused. That event? It wasn't anti-police. It was about transparency. About survival. If that photo is what makes me dangerous, then the danger isn't me. The courtroom was silent. Then Langston returned to his seat. No applause. No nods. Just silence. But in that silence, something shifted. The prosecutor didn't speak again for the rest of the day. It began with a folder. Jamal dropped it on the defense table the next morning. Thicker than before. Paper sticking out the sides. No label. Langston glanced at it. What is it? He asked. Your outreach logs, Jamal said. The full ones. I found them. Langston's eyes narrowed. How? You left a flash drive at the center. One of the kids brought it to me. Langston blinked. Slowly. I didn't ask you to submit that. I know. Jamal sat down beside him, voice lower now. But they're trying to make this about your character. That gives us an opening. Langston didn't answer. He stared at the folder. Dozens of names inside. Dozens of moments he hadn't shared, not to prove anything, but to protect the kids who came to him not for justice, but for survival. You sure you want to open that door? He asked quietly. Jamal didn't speak right away. Then, I'm not. You are. That morning, the courtroom felt more like a theater. Spectators had returned. Police presence doubled. Langston noticed 2 jurors had been replaced. Illness, the judge said. He didn't believe it. The judge entered. The trial resumed. Jamal rose. Your Honor, with permission, the defense would like to submit supplemental material relevant to the defendant's character and community role. The prosecutor didn't object. She just crossed her arms. Judge Carrington nodded. Proceed. Jamal pulled out the folder. This file contains notarized letters from parents, youth workers, and probation officers detailing Mr. Myles's work as a volunteer legal aid. There are over 40 documented cases in which Mr. Myles helped local minors navigate their charges without pay or recognition. He paused. The prosecution wants you to believe Mr. Myles is dangerous because he's informed. Because he teaches other people how to survive a system that doesn't always protect them. He handed the folder to the clerk. Langston didn't look up. He kept his eyes on the floor, jaw locked. Mr. Myles, the judge said, would you be willing to testify to this material? He nodded once. Yes, Your Honor. As he took the stand, the courtroom held its breath. Jamal began gently. Why did you start the program? Langston answered, steady. Because no one helped me when I needed it. What do you mean? He took a breath. I was 11 when I got cuffed for the first time. I didn't know what I'd done. I just knew I was on the ground and my sister was screaming. He paused. No one explained anything. No one apologized. And no one was held accountable. That's what I try to change now. And have you ever received payment for your work? No. Why not? Because I'm not a lawyer. A murmur moved through the courtroom. But you've studied law? Langston nodded. Enough to survive. Jamal stepped back. No further questions. For the first time since the trial began, Langston looked at the jury. Not to plead. To measure. They were listening now. The next blow didn't come from Langston. It came from the bench. Judge Carrington stared at the affidavit in her hands. Her fingers didn't move. Her mouth was tight. For nearly a full minute, she said nothing. Then she looked up. Ms. Lewis, she said to the prosecutor, were you aware that 3 of your listed evidence submissions were missing attachments? The prosecutor froze. Your Honor, that can't be correct. Carrington tapped her pen. Item 12, Officer Injury Report, does not include a doctor's signature. Item 16, Surveillance Transcript, is missing timestamps. Item 21, Body cam metadata, is completely absent. Silence. Langston watched the jury. They were watching now too. Ms. Lewis tried to recover. These are clerical errors. Nothing that affects the facts of the case. Carrington leaned forward. You're asking this court to convict a man based on video evidence and sworn documents. If those documents are incomplete, that affects everything. Jamal stood slowly. Your Honor, in light of this discovery, we move to strike all 3 items from the evidentiary record. The prosecutor's voice sharpened. Objection. Overruled, Carrington said flatly. They're gone. Langston didn't move. He kept his face still, but his chest tightened in silence. Something was shifting. Something real. They called a recess. Outside the courtroom, Jamal leaned against the wall, breathing hard. I didn't even check the metadata file, he said. That was her own mistake. Langston didn't smile. They didn't think they'd need to try. Jamal nodded. They thought you were just a man with no options. That afternoon, they called Sasha. Langston's sister took the stand, nerves visible but voice strong. She spoke of their childhood. The first time Langston was pulled over, at 17, driving his coach's car. The second time, at 22, in front of her apartment. Always questioned. Never charged. And this time, Jamal asked. She looked at the jury. This time they wanted to break him. No objections. No interruptions. Her words stood untouched. When she stepped down, Langston caught her eye. She didn't smile. Just nodded. Like a soldier returning from the front line. Jamal stood for his final motion of the day. We request a bench review of all surveillance materials. Full length. Unedited. The judge raised an eyebrow. Explain. We believe the edited footage used by the prosecution does not reflect the original timeline. Specifically, we believe Officer Faulkner's collapse occurred before any physical contact with Mr. Myles. Gasps. Small. Controlled. But they happened. Carrington turned to the prosecutor. Ms. Lewis? We were not given alternate versions. Jamal held up a flash drive. We subpoenaed the city's server directly. The judge accepted the evidence. Court recessed for the day. As Langston was escorted back through the corridor, one officer at the end of the hallway stepped aside. Didn't meet his eye. Didn't say a word. And for the first time, Langston felt it. They were starting to fear the truth. The room was silent as the footage began. Judge Carrington sat upright, eyes fixed on the monitor placed beside the bench. The jury leaned forward. Even the bailiff stopped mid-step. The raw video was longer than the version the prosecution had shown. Longer by almost 30 seconds. That was all it took. Faulkner stepped into frame, hand already on his holster. Langston stepped out of his car, slowly, hands visible. No sound, just motion. His body language was calm, measured. Then it happened. Faulkner stumbled backward. But not because of any contact. Langston hadn't moved. Not an inch. The timestamp appeared clearly, 9:43 and 18 seconds p.m. The moment Faulkner fell. The moment before Langston even approached him. There it was. Undeniable. The courtroom didn't gasp. It didn't move. Because the kind of silence that followed wasn't shock. It was exposure. The prosecutor didn't speak. Her eyes were locked on the screen, face pale. Jamal broke the silence. Your Honor, the defense renews its motion to dismiss all charges immediately. Carrington didn't respond at first. She was watching the footage again, now in slow motion. Faulkner's stagger. His look behind him. The fact that no one touched him. Langston sat still. He had no expression on his face. No celebration. Just breath. Slow. Deep. Because even now, they could try something. After a long pause, the judge leaned forward. I will take this under review. Jamal stood. Your Honor. Carrington raised a hand. This court will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. for ruling. The gavel struck once. Session over. Langston was let out quietly. No cuffs this time. Back in the holding area, Jamal joined him. You saw her face, he said. She knows. Langston didn't nod. She's deciding whether to let them lose, he replied. You think she'd still cover for them? Langston looked at the wall. I think people like her don't like being tricked. But they also don't like undoing the system they helped build. Jamal exhaled. What about the jury? They already know. He paused. But knowing isn't the same as acting. That night, Langston didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid. Because this was the closest he had ever come to the edge, and the edge doesn't promise anything. Just one wrong move. Just one comfortable lie. And everything would slide back to silence. Langston was woken early. The guard at his cell didn't speak, just tapped the bars and gestured. When Langston stepped into the hallway, two officers flanked him, not the usual one. Their silence wasn't procedural. It was heavy, intentional. In the waiting room, Jamal was already pacing. They offered a deal, he said without looking up. Langston froze. What kind of deal? No time served. Just a plea. Misdemeanor obstruction. You walk out today. Langston stared at him. They saw the footage. Jamal nodded. They did. So why offer a deal? Jamal finally looked at him. Because they'd rather you plead guilty to something than let you walk out untouched. No apology. No dismissal. Just compromise. Langston sat. You think I should take it? I think it's a trap. It's clean on the surface, but it dirties your name forever. Langston leaned forward, elbows on his knees. They're scared, he said. They should be. At 10 a.m., the courtroom filled one last time. The same faces. The same tension. Judge Carrington entered slower today. More deliberate. She called the court to order. Before anyone else could speak, Langston stood. Your Honor, I'd like to respond to the plea offer. The room shifted. Jamal turned slightly, just enough to show he hadn't expected it either. Carrington nodded. Go ahead. I decline, Langston said. I won't plead to something I didn't do. The judge held his gaze for a moment, then nodded again. Very well. She turned to the jury box. You have now seen all evidence, heard all testimony, and witnessed the full recording. It is your duty to deliberate on the charges. She gave her instructions. The jury left. 38 minutes passed. When they returned, the foreman stood. We find the defendant not guilty on all counts. The courtroom didn't cheer. It didn't breathe. Langston didn't move. Not until the judge spoke again. Mr. Myles, you're free to go. He exhaled. That's all. One breath. Outside, the sky had cleared. But it wasn't lighter. Reporters stood behind barriers. Officers lined the exits. No one clapped. No one apologized. Jamal walked beside him in silence. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Langston paused. What now? Jamal asked. Langston looked straight ahead. Now I go back. To what? To the center. You're still going to help those kids? Langston's voice was flat. Especially now. He walked forward. No cameras followed. No hands reached out. But one truth had made it into the record. And that was enough. For today. It rained the morning after the verdict. Not heavy. Just steady enough to make the streets shine like glass. Langston stood by the window of the youth center, watching kids shuffle inside, hoods up, shoes soaked. He had unlocked the door at 7 a.m., like always. No celebration. No welcome back banner. Just routine. That's how he wanted it. He moved through the hallway, turned on lights, opened the file room. It still smelled like printer ink and carpet glue. On his desk sat the same folder, his folder filled with testimonies, transcripts, and now court records. He didn't touch it. Not yet. At 9:12 a.m., the door opened. It was Malik. Same hoodie. Same backpack. But this time, no swagger. He walked in slow. Sat down across from Langston without speaking. Langston didn't ask why. Malik finally looked up. They really dropped it? All of it. Langston nodded. All of it. Malik leaned back. So that's it. Langston shook his head once. No. That's one. Malik frowned. One. One truth. One lie corrected. That's not it. That's where it starts. They sat in silence. Outside, the rain softened. Langston pulled out a notebook. The same kind he always used. He flipped past old pages. New names. New cases. You still want help with yours? He asked. Malik hesitated. Then nodded. Langston opened a pen. All right then. Let's get to work. For a moment, Malik just stared. Then he leaned forward. Langston wrote. Not because the court cleared his name. Not because the jury saw the truth. But because somewhere, right now, a kid just like him was being told to get on the ground. Again. And this time, someone would be ready. He looked across the room, where 3 more chairs waited for kids who hadn't come yet. But they would. They always did. Sometimes angry. Sometimes scared. Sometimes quiet. But always alone. Langston had once been all 3. He tapped the pen twice on the paper. You remember your case number? He asked. Malik nodded. 01433B. Langston wrote it down. Slowly. Carefully. You got school this week? Yeah. Tuesdays and Thursdays. All right. We'll build around that. Malik glanced at the wall. There was no plaque. No diploma. Just a whiteboard with names erased and rewritten each day. You really do this every week? Langston didn't look up. Every day. Malik nodded again. The kind of nod that meant he understood something he hadn't before. Langston closed the notebook. Come back tomorrow. Malik stood. I will. Langston watched him leave. Then opened a second notebook. Because the system didn't rest. And neither could he. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.